server at a restaurant knew my husband and told him about my dinner W/my affair. Then he showed up. Infidelity is one thing, but having security kick me, my husband, and my AP out of a restaurant because my husband showed up to confront me about cheating is insane. My name is Danielle. I'm a 27 years old female from Houston. I'm married to Theo, a 31-year-old banker. Theo and I have been married for almost 3 years now, and I've been cheating for almost 6 months. I got caught very fast, and the situation is out of hand. Honestly, I never saw myself committing adultery ever in my life, but things changed, and I did it anyway. I'm not a gold digger who just lays around the house and expects money from her husband. I am not a housewife either. I also work. I run a thrift store with 3 of my friends. It's a joint business, and before you guess, yes, I met my AP Dan through my thrift business. But before we head into the genesis of our forbidden relationship, I'll tell you about my marriage. Theo and I have been friends for years, even before we got married, but best friends, but we knew of each other and hung out together once in a while. He's 4 years older than me and has views quite different from mine. I love to be outgoing and social, but Theo is the exact opposite. Despite our differences, we actually made our marriage work, and it has been great. Well, it had been great till I lost my self-control and cheated on him. I know he will never forgive me for what I did, and that just makes me feel a lot guiltier than I want to feel. Theo and I leave for work together. In fact, he drops me off before going to his workplace. My friends and I have a very specific system of business, and that way, we share days of the week among ourselves in order to keep everything running. I usually head Mondays and Tuesdays, so on a certain Monday morning about 9 months ago, I met Dan. I had no idea that the tall, attractive man walking into our store with his sister would end up being the reason I ended my marriage. The first thing I noticed when he walked in was how handsome he was. He's tall too, and I've always had a thing for tall guys. Theo is tall too, but Dan is significantly taller than Theo. Aside from his height, there's nothing good about him. He's not too muscular or big. I was instantly drawn to his brown eyes and the way he was so supportive of his sister as she walked around the store trying to find something nice to hit. The moment I noticed my attraction for him, I tried my best to avoid him as much as possible, but that was impossible because I was in charge on Mondays and Tuesdays, and since it was a Monday, I had no choice but to take over and do my job. His sister kept on asking for his opinion, so he was literally with her throughout, and that automatically made the both of us speak. After his sister went into the changing room to try what she picked, we were left alone. He approached me and asked for my name. I swear that I didn't want to tell him my real name, but I felt like we might never even meet again, so it was probably best to just tell him my name. We introduced ourselves, and then his sister came out. After some time, they paid and left. I forgot all about the encounter and went on with my life like nothing happened. That same day, Theo came to pick me up after work. Normally, I would tell him all about my day and what happened, but on that particular day, I just didn't add in the fact that a handsome tall man walked into the store with his sister. I didn't add it because I felt it was a useless detail considering the fact that it might have been a one-time meeting. 3 weeks after that meeting, Dan walked into the store with his sister again. I had to do a double take because I couldn't believe that I was seeing him again. Trust me, guys, I had forgotten all about our encounter. So when I saw him, it was a very surprising thing. Notwithstanding, I welcomed them and helped with their shopping experience like I usually did. While I was waiting for his sister to pick something, he pulled me to the side and asked to have it with me. I agreed immediately because I actually thought it was business talk, but it ended up being something else. Can you believe he told me that he had been trying to reach me for 3 weeks? Yes, he actually came to the store looking for me, but he didn't see me. I was surprised because I never imagined that the same man I saw and found attractive had been trying to get a hold of me all those while. He came on Fridays for 3 weeks straight, but I usually didn't come to work on Friday. Can you also believe that he came alone looking for me, but pretends like he wanted to get a gift for his sister? It finally made sense because none of my friends mentioned that anyone was looking for me. He told me he never asked, just looked around the store. Dan told me that he decided to bring his sister again on a Monday in hopes that he would see me, and he did. At that moment, I didn't know how to feel. Honestly, it was literally a lot to take in at that point. Honestly, I was mostly excited. I know that's shameful, but I can't lie about it. I liked the idea of someone going through such lengths just to see me, and yes, the fact that he was attracted added to it. A part of me tried to remind me that if he went to such lengths just to see me, he probably wanted something, but I didn't care. The physical attraction I had for him kind of blurred my sense of reasoning. Before he left that day, he casually asked for my phone number. Instead of giving it to him right away, I told him he could have it when he next came to the store. Yes, I did that intentionally so I could see him again. After he left the store, I knew I was getting myself into something crazy. My common sense tried to warn me, but I told myself a little flirting won't hurt. It was exciting to think about, and that excitement was more than the fear I felt, so I rolled with it. Just like I did the last time, I omitted the fact that I spoke to Dan when Theo came to pick me up and asked about my day. Theo didn't notice anything was off because it was still early in the relationship. It wasn't even a relationship at that point. Dan and I just met twice at that point, and I swear that I didn't imagine us getting together at all. The next Monday, Dan actually walked into the store by himself. He didn't bring his sister along like he did the first 2 times we met. "Can I have your number now?" That was the first thing he said when he walked into the store. I was impressed with his direct approach, so I gave him my number immediately he asked. He told me he had to go for a meeting, so he had to leave early. After he left, he was all I could think about. I tried to fight it off, but nothing worked. I knew it was wrong to think of another man as a married woman, but the temptation outweighed all the restrictions I tried to have. 2 hours later, Dan texted me. I can still remember how excited I was when I saw his text. The fact that I was even that excited is what scared me. I chatted him back, and that's how I spent the day. He was flirtatious from the beginning and didn't try to hide it. His texts were direct, and he didn't beat around the bush. I liked that about him, and we continued to talk. As we all know, karma has a way of giving a dangerous warning before it finally strikes. Theo noticed some days later that I spent more time on my phone. That usually never happened because I hardly used my phone. I'm the type of person that loves being present rather than always being on my phone. That's why it was easy for Theo to notice that I loved being on my phone suddenly. Of course, I knew it would be difficult to hide the fact that I chatted with Dan from him, but I never saw his questions coming. I swear that it was difficult to defend myself when he asked me that question on our way home. He even went as far as asking me to show him what piqued my interest so much. I instantly got anxious and sweat started to form on my head. I tried to change the topic, but Theo was adamant and he asked to see my phone. At that moment, I actually thought it was over for me and I would get caught. But I was able to get out of that decision by accusing him of not trusting me. I told him I was just looking at new designs that would look good in the thrift store. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further either. My Reddit family, that moment in the car, opened my eyes to a lot of things. It made me realize that I was actually hiding a secret from my husband. I realized that the text between me and Dan had to be so bad if I didn't want Theo to know about it. I smelled trouble right away, and my mind told me to cut Dan off and stop chatting with him. But I brushed the thoughts off and just told myself that the best thing to do was be careful from them on. Big things start small, guys. Always keep that in your mind. I realized this abruptly too. I realized that my relationship with Dan started small and was advancing into a cheating scandal when he texted me and suggested we have lunch together weeks later. I didn't tell him I was married or that I was in a relationship of any kind. I kept that piece of information away from him because I initially thought I'd flirt with him, pass time, and then cut him off. But when he asked us to go out for lunch, I promised myself never to tell him I'm married. Call me whatever you want, but I do not care. I'm just relaying everything that happened at that moment. I didn't want Dan to know I'm married for any reason. That is besides the fact, by the way. About lunch, yes, I skipped work to go to lunch with him. It was a simple lunch, and we mostly spoke through it. Even though things seemed to be going slow, I could already tell that I was falling for Dan. I could tell that I was getting obsessed with him. From the texts to the calls and then the lunch, I was in trouble and I knew it. Dan, on the other hand, was doing a lot. He's confident and always direct. He flirted openly and didn't try to choose his words. Though, I don't blame him for any of that. I never gave him a reason to choose his words because I never told him I was married. Before I go on, I'd like to ask, what's your own definition of cheating? Because for me, you don't cheat until you actually have sexual relations with another person. The texts, calls, and dates didn't feel like cheating to me. At that point, 8 didn't have any guilt because I believed that I wasn't doing anything wrong. We didn't have sex yet, so I believed I was clean. The only reason I didn't want Theo to catch me then was because I knew he'd read something different into everything. But our lack of sexual relations didn't last forever. Eventually, I actually slept with Dan and officially committed adultery. So, it happened on a Saturday about 5 or 6 months ago. Dan finally invited me to his house. All the while we were chatting, he'd never asked me to come to his house before. He actually courted me like it was a real relationship. He had no idea he was speaking to a married woman. I never brought up my marriage to him. I will be honest, Dan was very respectful. He did things a real boyfriend would do. He never brought me to his house for several weeks. When he finally asked me to come, I didn't hesitate. At that point, I was already 100% smitten with him in every form. I was literally obsessed, and I believed I had fallen for him. The infatuation was so strong that I lost my common sense and self-control. When I got to his house, I didn't act like a married woman with a husband at home waiting for her at all. I acted single and free, and I did things I'm too ashamed to talk about. I actually sneaked out of the house and didn't tell Theo I was going anywhere. I also switched off my phone because I didn't want him to call me or disturb me. I usually did that anytime I went out with Dan. It was my way of making sure Dan never found out the truth. So, while I was at Dab's house, I cooked for him, and after that, we watched a movie and started making out halfway through the movie. It was a slow burn thing, and I enjoyed it. From kissing and fondling, things got heated, and then we went to his bedroom. I had zero hesitations, and we slept together. But the guilt did come after everything happened. I got sick of myself because it was at that moment I realized that I cheated on my husband. Before, it felt like I was just flirting, but the sexual relationship made it feel so real, and it registered in my head that I had committed adultery. I felt bad, so bad that I gave Dan a lame excuse so I could leave. When I left, I didn't have the balls to go back home. I knew I couldn't bear to look my husband in the eye after what I did. What would he say? What would he do? Will he notice even if I don't tell him? These were the questions that ran through my mind as I sat on the sidewalk. I was already 2 blocks away from the house, but I couldn't bring myself to go on. I waited till it was extremely late in the night, and I was sure that Theo was asleep before I sneaked in and had a shower. I had to scrub my body roughly because I feared he could smell Dan on me. It was a stupid thought, but taking a shower helped. I slept in the living room because I couldn't bring myself to sleep next to Theo. The next morning, Theo woke me up angrily. He was extremely angry, and he didn't even try to hide his anger. At first, I got scared because I didn't know why he was angry. I suspected that he found out I cheated already, so I literally started shaking. Theo confronted me about leaving the house without letting him know, and also turning off my phone. His words took me by surprise, and though I was relieved that he didn't know I cheated, I was also left speechless. It was hard to pretend like nothing happened, but I had to do that in order to keep my marriage. I could barely look him in the eye as I tried to make up excuses about where I was and what I did. But none of it seemed to make sense. Before I could finish defending the first accusations, he asked why I didn't sleep on the bed the night before. Theo was sincerely concerned, and I could tell with the way he looked at me that he was disappointed. That's what made me feel worse. The fact that he didn't even know what I did yet, he was already disappointed. I am literally pulling my hair as I write this now. I didn't see it then, but now that I'm narrating it, I know I messed up big time. Theo cared about me so much, and he never hid that from me. But now, he doesn't want to see my face or have anything to do with me. Theo asked if there was anything wrong, and I made up the excuse of having issues at work that I had to sort out. I also said I didn't sleep in the room because I was so tired that I slept off on the couch in the living room. After telling him that, he didn't press further. He just asked me never to switch off my phone before leaving the house again. And then he asked me what issues I had at work. He was genuinely concerned, so I made up stories and told him things that never happened. I knew deep down that he wasn't buying any of the stories, but he pretended to be okay with the things I said anyway. I knew he wasn't done, but I was thankful he left it there. So after that, I still ended up at Dan's house again. He texted me to ask why I left abruptly, and even though I made up excuses, he asked to see me. I ignored him for 2 weeks, but he was persistent and showed up at the store. I had to tell him to leave early because Theo had promised to take me out that same day. Dan almost didn't want to leave, but I made sure he exited the store. Even after all these, I got infatuated with him, our texts and calls again, and I ended up on his bed some days later. I slept with him again, and continuously did over the past 4 months. But last month, my life, my extramarital affair, and my marriage all literally took a turn for the worse. Last month, Dan asked me to go to dinner with him. He told me he wanted us to do something different since we never had dinner before and always had lunch. I said no several times, but then he started getting suspicious and he got angry, so I agreed. I knew having dinner would be risky because it would get late, but I didn't want Dan to get upset, but I had to say yes because I didn't want him to suspect anything. He took me to a completely different restaurant for dinner that day, but we had no idea that would be the end of our relationship. Even before we got our food, Dan already started kissing me and we started making out. The food took a while to get there before we finally started eating. Dan said he wanted us to spend a long time there, and I agreed. I was already thinking of the excuses to give Theo when I got home. After almost 2 hours at the restaurant, the worst possible thing happened. Someone touched me from behind, and when I looked up, my husband, Theo, was standing there. My heart almost leaked out of my chest when I saw him. He was the last person on earth that I expected to catch me there. "So this is why you've been sneaking out. You're cheating on me," Theo said angrily. I remember his words clearly. I was so shocked that I got up and tried to pull him outside. Dan didn't know I was married, and Theo didn't know Dan. My mind was a mess, so I tried to defuse the situation, but nothing worked. Theo refused to move. He started cursing me out and calling me a disgusting cheat in front of everyone. People started staring, and I wished to be swallowed by the ground. Dan had no idea what was going on, so he stood up to defend me. Before I knew what was happening, Theo and Dan were in a heated exchange. Dan almost punched Theo when he said he was married to me, and he called Dan my plaything. Dan refused to believe Theo, and before I knew it, the both of them were cursing each other. Theo then faced me and told me the marriage was over. G called me a cheater and accused me of being a loose woman. Dan tried to push Theo away, and that's how they ended up getting physical. For the first time in my life, I was grabbed by security and thrown out of a restaurant. Same thing happened to Dan and Theo because the restaurant felt like we were disrupting the orderliness inside. While outside, Theo grabbed my purse and snatched my ring. It was almost as if he knew I would hide it. After that, he left. Dan was shocked and asked me if I was really married. I finally told him the truth, but before I could explain, he left. He has since blocked me and blocks me anytime I call with another phone number. Theo threw me out of the house and told me to expect divorce soon. Update. My Reddit family, my life has been hell. I'm here to update you all on what has been going on. So, Dan and I have not seen or spoken since the restaurant incident. I can't believe I lost Theo and risked our marriage for that man-child. Just after what happened, he cut me off without waiting to hear from me. I find that completely immature. I'm here going through all this, and he has a loved one? Sick. Theo, on the other hand, sent me divorce papers 6 months ago. I tried my best to beg him, but he refused. I would be a fool not to recognize the fact that he has always cared for me and put me first. I regret losing our marriage, and it haunts me every day. A lot of you have been wondering how he suddenly showed up at the restaurant. Well, brace yourselves, because it's not something I expected. Can you believe that it was his friend who worked as a server at that restaurant that called him and told him I was kissing a stranger in the restaurant? I had no idea he had a friend there. I had to beg Theo to tell me how he knew where I was that night. The fact that Dan and I were involved in PDA even made matters worse. I lost my sense of reasoning, but in my defense, I had no idea he had a friend that worked there. I know a lot of his friends attended our wedding though, but I never spoke to them long enough to know if anyone worked in a restaurant, or I would have had my guard up. Theo hates me with everything in him. I wanted to keep the house at least, but he has refused to give me the house or a penny. His lawyers are fighting hard to make sure I get nothing from him. Since we have no children, it's literally a lost cause. I do regret everything I did because I know I messed up and lost a real man just to have useless fun. The guilt keeps eating me up, but I know it's my karma. Theo gave me the benefit of doubt, but I let him down. I'm disappointed in myself too. I should have done better.